Hey everybody, this is Michael with MichaelDrewMusic.com. Have you ever been working on a new song and come across a chord with an SUS after the chord name? Maybe it'll say SUS2 or SUS4, SUS2, SUS4. That's the topic of today's video. We are going to be learning about these chords. We're going to look at how to build them and how we would use them in songs that maybe we're writing or we're learning. So pop on over to the keyboard with me now and let's break down the sus chord. For the sake of today's lesson, I'm going to operate under the assumption that we are familiar with triads. So if a triad, if that's something that's new to you, if you're not sure what that is, I do ask that you please watch my video on triads first, because to understand what a sus chord is, we first have to know what a basic major and minor chord is. So check that out if you haven't yet already. And once you know what a triad is, let's move forward. Let's take a look at sus chords. Okay, so what is a sus chord? Sus stands for suspended or suspension. And this comes from a classical music progression called a suspension. That wasn't just one chord. It had to do with a way of altering a chord and then resolving that chord. It was a way of creating tension and then resolving that tension. And so what I'd like to do first is look at an example of a suspension. Let's see what's going on there. And then we'll take a look at sus chords as we think of them in pop music today. So here's an example of a suspension. Now a suspension is going to have three parts, okay? It's going to have a preparation, it's going to have a suspension in the middle, and then it's going to resolve. It's going to have a resolution, okay? So here's an example of a suspension. Okay, I'm going to start with this chord. So what I've got here is I've got F, A, C. That is an F major chord there with an F on top. Okay, so it's an F major chord with an octave on top of the root note. Okay, now what if I did this? And there's the resolution. Okay, so we've got preparation, suspension, resolution. Okay, now let's break down what I just did. So what I did is I went from an F major chord, and then I switched my left hand to C and G. Okay, so now I'm looking at C, G, C, F. Okay, and then I took the F, I lowered it down to an E, and that is a C major chord right there. That's C, E, G. Now the E is up here instead of down here, but if you put this into one octave, it would just be C major. Okay, so that's what happened, is we started with an F chord, suspension, and we end on a C major chord. Okay, now in terms of pop music or sus chords, it's that middle one that we are concerned with, right? That's the suspension, that's the sus chord. Okay, and so let's take a look at what's going on there. Here it is again. Okay, so we've got C, G, C, F. Now, if we take that chord and we cram all those notes into one octave, we get rid of the double C's, right? Because we don't need two C's. So we've got C, G, F. Okay, if we take the G, we put it up here, we get that. And that is a C sus chord right there. And so if we look at what we did, a sus chord is starting with the C major chord here, C, E, G, a sus chord is taking the E, the middle note, the third, up 1/2 step to the fourth. And there's C sus or C sus 4. So if you just see the letter name and then sus, that's assumed to be a sus 4. Sometimes there'll be a 4 after it. It'll say SUS4. Sometimes it'll just say sus, but that's the chord we're looking at there. So again, you take the third, you raise it by 1/2 step up to the fourth, and there you get your sus 4. Now, a sus 2 chord is going to go the other way. It's going to take the third and go down a whole step to D, okay, in this case. So again, here's C major, 1, 2, 2/2 steps. There is C sus 2, okay, because now it's got the second scale degree in there, right? So 1, 2, 5, and again, there's no third there, right? So sus chords, they're neither major nor minor. There's no third in them. And that's why the pull is always to want to hear them go to a third, right? We want to hear this go to there. Right? And so that's why, classically speaking, a suspension always resolves. Now, that's a great sound, and that's usually where our ear wants it to go. So in a lot of pop music, that happens anyway. In a lot of pop music, it does resolve. But certainly there are many of examples in pop music where it doesn't, where there's just a sus chord played and that tension is just left there. There are no rules. And, nowadays, nobody's really following the rule of a suspension. But something to keep in mind there, that tension wants to go to the major chord. It wants to resolve. So you can apply this anywhere in music. If you have a major chord, find your middle note, up a half step to the fourth, that's sus4, down a whole step to the second, that would be sus2. Okay, so like we could do this, of course, in C, all white keys, right? There's a sus4. We could go to E, right? So here's a sharp in the middle, G sharp in the middle. All right, go up to the fourth there. We could go to B flat. Okay. There's my sus2, right? I take the D, I go down to C, the second scale degree. There's my B flat sus2. Okay, so wherever you are, whatever chord you're playing, if you can build the major, you can then build the sus. You can build the sus4 or the sus2 simply by shifting that third up or down. Another interesting note about sus chords is that every sus4 chord is also a sus2 chord with a different root note. So let's take a look at that. If we go back to the chord we're using here for the most part, C sus4 or C suspended. Okay, there it is. So that's again 1, 4, 5 in the key of C. If I take the C and I put it on top, okay, so I'm going to keep the same three notes. I'm going to keep C, F, G, but I'm going to put the C on top now. We get this. What chord is that? That is F sus2, right? Because here's F major, F A C. We take the A, we lower it down to a G, and there's F sus2, right? So C sus4 and F sus2 are the same chord. And that will be true with every sus2 and sus4 chord. That if you rearrange the notes, you get a different chord with the same set of notes. So if I'm playing a chord chart and I see C sus4, I could play this, and I could also play F sus2. And either one of those would work. Either one of those would have the same set of notes. So that, I think, is a helpful tool to remember, is that every sus4 is also a sus2 and vice versa. Now, what do these sus chords do for us? Well, here's two quick things. And there's more that can be said about this for sure, but these are a couple quick things off the top of my head that sus chords do for us. The first is that they simply give us a sound that's neither major or minor. They give us another tool in our tool belt, right? That we can use to create music, another sound. So, of course, if we're talking triads, we've got major, we've got minor, right? Now, we also have, as we learned in the triad video, we have diminished and we have augmented. Now, those last two, diminished and augmented, those are sort of the forgotten chords of pop music, right? They'll pop up every once in a while in pop and rock music, but generally not. Those are pretty dissonant sounds there. And so oftentimes those are not real pleasing to the ear. So those are oftentimes not used. And so a sus chord gives us something it's more pleasing to the ear, and it's neither major nor minor. So it's something different, right? How would you describe what a sus chord sounds like? If we think of major as being happy and bright, and minor as being dark and sad, a sus chord, it's kind of smooth sounding. It's got kind of an airy sort of, dreamy or spacey sound to it. It's very unique. You certainly know it when you hear it. you know, but it sounds nice. It's good to listen to. And so it pops up in music all the time. Listen for it. You'll hear it in movies. You'll hear it on your favorite records. It's all over the place. And so it just gives us another tool that we can use to express ourselves musically. So I think that's the biggest reason why it's good to know what these chords are and to know how to build them and how to use them. Now, the second thing that I will say goes back to the classical suspension once again. And that is that suspended chords are used to create tension, to create suspense. Now, that's not what SUS stands for, but it could stand for suspense, because that's really what it's doing, right? It's creating this unresolved tension in our music that then we can resolve. And so that's going to be the most common way that you're going to hear these chords used, is in a way that always resolves back to the major. It's in a way that creates a situation where there's something that isn't quite there yet, and then it's resolved back to where it needs to be. Okay, so I'll give you an example here. So if I have two chords, C and G, okay, I can do that. That is great. That is very nice. Here's a way where suspensions can be used to add some of that tension and then resolve it within each chord. Check this out. Right? So wasn't that cool? I was using the C sus4, okay, and then I had the G sus4 there going. And it's a way to add movement within the chord. It's a way to maybe work in some kind of more of a melodic feel into some of the chords. And it just creates tension and excitement that then can be resolved back to the triad. And so I was basically just playing two chords there both times. But I think the second way was a little bit more interesting, at least some of the time. You know, you don't always want suspensions in there. You know, you don't always want to use suspended chords. It depends what you're doing. But at the very least, it's a great option to have. It's something to be aware of. And it's certainly something to employ when you're looking for that particular sound, when you're working on your own compositions, or something to watch out for when you're learning other people's work. Listen for those suspended chords. You'll hear them all over the place. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to check out this brief explanation on SUS chords. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those down below. I would love to hear how you use SUS chords in your music. And if you found this content helpful, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful time making music, and I will plan to see you next time.